All right, everybody. So I wanted to film a little bit of a video here regarding the pivot and related specifically to the downswing. I was having a great conversation with one of the coaches from my mentorship program yesterday, and he was asking me a couple of questions of what I like to look for when it comes to the body movements in the downswing and how I analyze swings. And I thought this would be a great conversation for everybody to kind of understand, at least from my point of view. Whenever I'm looking at body movements coming down, okay, I never look at it as an isolated event. You know, you would be amazed at how often I get DMs on every social media channel about I'm early extending, I'm stalling, I'm flipping, I'm hanging back, I can't get my weight forward, I'm trying to correct it and I can't. And this relates back to the fact that it's not an isolated event, okay? So whenever there's a variable that's out of position in your golf swing, whether that is a club face that could be too open or it could be too shut. Believe it or not, there are cases where golfers have the club face way too closed and the body's going to adapt to that and it's not going to be pretty, but it's going to happen. And we'll talk through the scenarios. It could be the club moving really poorly, which is probably the more common issue, right? The shaft comes down way too vertical in the downswing. It's not dropping behind you enough in a shallowing way. So directionally, the club is not moving behind your body. This is super important if you want to be able to free up the pivot. And again, we'll talk about this. And one of the other ones that we see a lot of is a lack of hand depth at the top of the swing. These are like the three macro variables that we see that tend to get out of position a lot in the golf swing, if we're going to kind of simplify this. So when I'm talking about hand depth, I mean the arms get too upright and they stay too much in front of the body at the top of the backswing. They don't work around the body enough. And again, this is another variable that's important to look at. So when I'm analyzing the downswing and I'm analyzing the pivot, I'm actually not looking at the body movement itself. I'm looking at what is everything working around it doing, and are the variables moving in a way that frees up the body to turn, or are they moving in a way that is actually incentivizing the body to have to do something crazy at the bottom to make the swing work? There is a combination of matchups that take place. It's actually not just one variable relative to the pivot, it's all of them in its entirety. So when I see these comments of like, I'm early extending, I'm stalling, I'm flipping, and I dislike them, I need everybody to understand that when you're standing over the golf ball, you have an intended target in your mind that you're trying to hit. If there is a variable that's out of place that's not going to let you hit that target, the first thing that's going to be compensated is your body. And a lot of times it's subconscious movements. It's not like you're trying to do this in the downswing, right? You're not getting the club coming down too steep and then it's like, oh, I have to do this to make it work. No, but your body figures that if you want to hit the ball to that target, this is the only way you're going to make it work. So for example, I just got an online lesson this morning from a student who said, I've been trying for years to try to stop my early extension, but whenever I do, my path gets very outside in. Believe it or not, this is a very common problem. So when we're looking at the shaft, okay, and I'm going to talk through these three macro variables and how I relate them to the body. Let's start with the shaft, okay? So what we need to understand here is, what does rotation do to the club coming down? So assuming that all the variables are going to remain constant in your golf swing, if you create more rotation, what's going to happen to the club? Well, the club is actually going to come down on a steeper plane. Rotation is a steepening move to the shaft. So if my club is just standing in a certain position and it's not doing anything, it's not shallowing, but it's also not steepening, right? It's just going to stay in its position, stay in its plane. And I rotate my body, this club is going to come more in front of me in the downswing. So it's actually a steepening move. So in order to make sure that we can rotate, you need something to offset what the rotation is going to do to the club. That is why I'm such a big advocate of the club pitching back behind the body coming down. Because when you have the club in a state of shallowing, it's dropping behind you. What does rotation do? It's trying to get the club to steepen and come in front of you. The two will offset each other, and you can come down on a really good plane and not have the club get too out in front of you that you're going to start swinging too far from outside in. This is a very simplified way of looking at it. Obviously, we can talk in a lot more detail about this, but I don't want to confuse people too much. Another thing to look at is the club face, right? What does rotation do to the club face? There's a ripple effect when you rotate. It's not just the body rotating, you're changing all the variables around it as well. When you rotate, you are slowing down the rate of closure of the club face, right? If my body stalls, the hands are going to take over and flip. If my body doesn't stall and it keeps turning, my hands and forearms will be a lot more passive through the ball. Well, that slows down the rate of closure. So guess what? If my club face is on the open side in the downswing, right? Instead of my club face coming down slightly toe down in a slightly stronger position, if my club face is coming down and like the toe of the club head is wide open here, well, my club face is open. If my body rotates, that club face is not going to square up very fast. In fact, rotation is going to slow down that speed in the closure of the club face. So what's going to happen? You're going to likely hit a big old block, right? Keep in mind, the more rotation you create, the more your hands and arms get in front of you, the more shaft lean you're likely to create. It moves the low point more forward. There's more compression that comes from that. So when I create more rotation, if my hands are getting more forward and I'm creating more shaft lean and the club face is not squaring up as fast, but my club face is already open coming down, I got no chance. It's not functional. So when you see the body reacting to the club coming down too steep, it's because it knows that if I rotate with the club coming down steep, my path is not going to be very functional. I'm not going to hit a good shot. So the body either stalls and tilts back, or it creates early extension. It does all sorts of crazy things to try to get the club on a better plane coming down. When the club face is open and the body stalls a lot and you see either early releasing or a lot of excessive forearm rotation through the ball, right, a lot of flipping, those things are not being done for no reason. They're being done to give you a chance of hitting your target. That is a move that allows you to square the club face because it's too open coming down. So the root cause of the problem in both of those scenarios is not the body and the pivot moving poorly. It's the variable that's out of place and your body's trying to find a way to make the swing work. So when I look at the pivot in the downswing, the body movement itself, whether that's through the tilting portion, the rotation portion, or the lateral portion, right? It's a three-dimensional movement with the pivot. Any of those things, a lot of times, I'm going to change them last with related to the downswing. Keep in mind, you can get the golfer in a better spot at the top of the backswing through better tilts, and that might actually help the downswing. But if we're talking specifically downswing related changes, like you're early extending or you're sliding and tilting too much or you're doing something crazy, the first thing you need to analyze are the variables around it first. If the variables are moving pretty good, then it's possible that the root cause is actually the body movement itself. At a certain point in time, you start changing all the other variables and making them move really, really efficiently, let's say. Then at that point in time, well, the last thing to change is actually the body movement. This might actually be the root cause of your problem. But in a large majority of cases, when people come to me for lessons, believe it or not, there is a variable that's out of place way before the body moves poorly. And the body moving poorly, I don't even look at it as a negative. I say the body has to move that way to make the swing functional. If you take that compensation away, meaning if you take the tilting away, the flipping away, the sliding or the stalling or the early extension, if you take that away from the golf swing, from a golfer who has a variable that's out of position, the swing actually breaks down. So although it might not look very efficient when you're doing that, you need to understand that there's a reason why you do it. I wanted to film this video to explain that to people. You know, I can talk about the hand depth too, right? So one last piece to this macro simplified puzzle. Like, what does rotation do to the hand path? Well, if I don't manipulate the arms themselves, right? This can be manipulated if I don't rotate differently. But assume that this relationship stays the same, meaning the distance between my arm and my chest stays the same, but I create rotation in my downswing. The more I rotate, the more the hands come in front of me. That is actually going to steepen my attack angle, and it's going to bring my path more from outside in. If my hands are too tall at the top of my backswing and I rotate and I don't change anything else, my hands are going to end up so far out in front of me, I'm going to hit really steep on the ball. So a lot of times what happens is the hands actually do get too far out in front, but then the golfer tilts back at the last second to try to drop the hands and club to the inside. Again, a compensation move, but that's actually made to make your swing work. It's not made to make your swing worse. There's timing elements in that obviously we don't like, but it's not there to penalize you. These movements are there to help you. In order to prevent your body from doing any of these crazy things that we dislike in the downswing, you have to fix these elements first. If any of these macro variables are out of position, the first thing that's going to be compensated from that is the way your body's moving. So this is just a video that I want to show you guys so that maybe you look at the swing a little differently with regards to these compensation movements that your body does in the downswing. So when I am looking at a golf swing, the last thing I'm going to change is the body movement, because a lot of times the body movement is is trying to correct one of these variables. Keep in mind, there are situations where fixing the body does fix these other variables. I do want to kind of add this to this at the end of this video. Like it does happen every now and again that, let's say, like a golfer's pulling down on the hands and the club's coming down steep from that. And if you create rotation and you slow down the hands, you can actually fix not only the hand path, but also the club movement at the same time. So there are outside scenarios where moving the body differently does help the other elements, but that's not always the case. And I would say in the majority of times, that's not the case. Okay, so I hope this doesn't confuse you too much. If you have any questions, please send me a DM and I would be happy to clarify this to you. But I hope this information helps.